Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Audra. And so, welcome everyone. So I'm Phil Bell, University of Washington, Seattle campus, and we've been doing work over the past 10 years around implementing equitable science instruction in relation to the NGSS and framework vision. I would say since 2016, although we did some climate work actually 20 years ago, off and on over the years. Since 2016, we've really sunk in. And so we've started building out broader resources. So I'm really going to do just kind of a resource sharing show and tell session today. And if anything comes up, please just stop me and we will make sense of it together. So hopefully you're seeing a window with my slides and a bunch of tabs, because I'm going to pop between different tabs. Excellent. Yeah, so this is a big collaborative effort, and I'll be talking about the different projects a little bit, just to kind of talk about where things came from. I'm going to drop the link here into the chat, so you can get to the PowerPoint for the session there, and the PowerPoint from the session right before this one around STEM teaching tools more generally. So they're both there now. We've been doing this work, and we're just trying to build open resources that are broadly useful around climate learning and teaching. So let's kind of dive into it. We've been funded through the National Science Foundation to do the STEM teaching tools work, and then two particular projects are kind of feeding into the resource collection. I'll talk a little bit more about each of them. I think at this point, I'll just say that the Climb Time project, which started in 2018, is a state-level professional learning initiative for in-service teachers, and it's worked with 26,000 teachers since 2018. So it's a broad-scale network of professional learning providers trying to do that shared good work to help teachers integrate climate teaching instruction into their teaching. The other initiative is a newer one. We launched formally just in February, the Climate Teacher Ed Collaborative. We're now working with teacher ed faculty to kind of help future teachers orient to this idea of integrating climate into their teaching. And so we have 16 faculty from different colleges, 16 different universities and colleges across Washington State, integrating climate into their courses for pre-service. And so these are the two efforts where we're building climate resources specifically, and both of them are funded through Washington State legislature processes that were initiated by Governor Inslee. So these are kind of enacting, using public funds to build capacity for climate literacy through education. The resources are all stored in one place on our website. So I'm going to flip over to, whoops, that's not it. Here it is. Flip over to the STEM Teaching Tools website now. And if you go to this climate learning tab, today I'll be sharing basically like by category all the different things that are bound up on this one portal. So it's a little bit, it's not the best design because it's a little bit just encyclopedic everything. But the presentation today hopefully will help you with different kinds of things that are available in the collection. They're kind of summarized here, and I'll open up each of those different kinds of resources kind of as we get further in. But if you're looking for the one stop shop kind of place, I'll just drop that link in chat. That's kind of where everything that I'll be talking about today resides. So as we've kind of come to grips with the accelerating impacts of the climate crisis, they are sweeping, they're multifaceted, they're having disproportionate impacts on different populations around the world. And it really requires a systemic societal response. In that context, education becomes a vital institution to respond and to build capacity across society to engage in responsive climate work across scales and in ways that are tailored to the needs of specific communities as the effects show up in different ways. And so part of our ongoing work is working from this commitment that all teachers need to be ready to teach about climate through whatever subject or context where they do that work. And so we have a high level question, which we're pursuing now, which is like, what resources do we need to support teachers in that important work? So that's kind of where we're coming from in this particular effort, and really just kind of want to invite open thinking in chat or in the, you know, just talking to each other over Zoom about like what is needed. And we have a set of things to share with you, but we know that there's a lot more that's still needed. We're going to start with just a few minutes of a video to frame kind of a climate justice focus. And as I say this, I realize that I didn't follow the good instructions that were sent to me when they queued up. So I'm going to like reshare my screen with optimized for video and sound. So hopefully that will be, oops, I have to enter something, hold on. Audrey, did that do the right thing?
I am looking at the STEM teaching tools right now.
All right, hold on a second. I'm going to try this again. I think I shared the wrong window, even though. All right, so now you should see, yeah, the window we're in. Okay, so we're going to watch just a few minutes of this particular video, and it's, I think it's a 10-minute thing overall. It's a really great overview of climate justice, but we're just going to get the first few bits on the table so we can kind of think with you know, ourselves about how to be approaching the work. I'm going to make the screen big. Hopefully does that still show? Yes. All right, and now I'm going to play.
No one can escape the climate crisis. It will, whether we choose to accept it or not, affect every single one of us. But climate change and its impacts are anything but equal. In fact, the cruel reality is that those who are the least responsible are already suffering the consequences. But how has this injustice come about? And how do we address it so that as climate change continues to worsen, we all stand a chance of weathering the storm? The world is a pretty overwhelming place right now.
A global pandemic,
increased social inequality,
political polarization,
And that ever-present thorn in our side, climate change.
climate change, extreme weather,
sea levels are rising.
biodiversity is reportedly declining, have left the world in a climate emergency.
In this series, we'll explore how we got here.
Hey, come take a look at this.
Did we get an ad?
If you
Hold
have
on.
a utility meter like this on the side of your house, we are looking for
Where we're headed, and what we can do to make a difference. This is The Breakdown. In the game of economic progress, some of us haven't been playing fair. A small elite have been stealing from the bank while the other players aren't looking. And they've rigged the deck so that they pull all the good cards. Their tactics have built megacities, industries, airports, shopping centres and penthouses. And as they've marched around the board, scooping up the rewards, the other players have been told to wait their turn. At the heart of climate change is a deep injustice. It is people of colour, women and indigenous communities, the players left behind, who are on the front lines and who are most at risk. To understand the extent of this injustice, it helps to look at these two maps. Look at the red in this one. It shows countries who've created the most carbon emissions, and in other words, contributed the most to climate change. Now look at the other map. Here the red shows countries that are the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. You can see they're almost directly inverted.
A lot of the success and sort of development of the global north has come at the fate of the global south. We have literally dug up resources, exploited those communities to build ourselves kingdoms in the north. And that has contributed to climate change. And now what we've left the global south with is runaway climate change without the resources to tackle it and without the resources to save their communities.
our biosphere.
All right, so that's the part I'm going to share. I do encourage you to kind of explore the full video clip. I'll drop the link. And I think we had someone join since I started to, so I want to go back and reshare the slides for today. So yeah, it's a pretty devastating situation and history to be educating about, and then thinking about what is a just climate response and both at all levels. That's kind of the multi-scalar piece, is that we have to worry about our own communities and those next to us and those on the other side of the world. So with that as kind of the justice frame, and this we use this in one of our resources to kind of frame this discussion. We're going to kind of engage in just a little bit of that discussion today. As you kind of think through it a little bit, when you then ask the youth how they are understanding climate change as a topic, a strong majority, 88%, actually care about it as a topic, but almost 2/3 of them are unsure what to actually do about it. So at some level, this is where education has this vital role to help close that kind of climate action gap based on understanding kind of the injustices that have been unfolding and will continue to expand as time goes on. So this is data from last May, and I think things, the climate crisis continues to open up. So it's even becoming more present over time. So we're going to stop and just do a little bit of learning that comes out of this resource I will share in a minute. This is like one of the embedded resources. So let's just pause for 2 to 3 minutes and take a look at this particular brief. We developed it about 4 years ago. And it was this idea that, in science education, historically, we have often taught, about, in data-driven ways, we've taught about the causes of climate change, but we haven't taught as much about like solutions in response to climate change. So like part of what the brief is trying to do is make an argument about like shifting our instructional focus to center on kind of the first and worst impacted communities and what can we learn about solutions, and responses as we kind of see that unfold. So let's just do some individual reading. STEM teaching tools are deceptively simple. They're kind of one-pagers front back, but they have a lot of embedded resources and really amazing ideas shared as well. So sink in and let's just do a scan of that for a couple minutes, and then we'll debrief it a little bit. All right, we'll come back together in about 30 seconds or so. Right. Well, I don't know if anyone feels like they'd like to unmute and share their thinking, like what implications for your own teaching come up for you as you read about these ideas would be something to think about. If you want to drop that in the chat, because the session is being recorded. I don't know if you're comfortable with it being recorded. Yeah, so you can share it over chat or unmute and share something, and then we'll make sense of this together.
Well, I just thought it was just very interesting. The Clark County School District puts on some movies, documentaries, and one of them was a climatologist who studies caves and talked about how you have naturally occurring ice ages and stuff like that. And she brought up the fact that like during the last shift, it was like 300, I don't remember if it's parts per million of CO2, and now we're over 400. And so that's kind of a big thing for, teaching students and how can we help that? And, and I teach kindergarten. So like our focus this year is going to be the monarch butterflies.
Yep.
And like, I'm going to do a PBL project of, we have our Amplify Science, and then we're going to add growing milkweed, and we're going to try it in our hydroponic system and in milk cartons, and then help pass them out to try and cover, endangered species and climate change and everything like that.
Yeah, the monarchs had a really good year this year. I think scientists are trying to figure out why the population boomed this past year, because they had been so worried about the declines.
Yeah, because earlier in the year they had come out saying they were endangered.
Right. Yeah. And I think overall they still are, but yeah.
But there's been a semi-surge. I guess our other friend left.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Audra, do you have a reflection or should we move on?
I just thought it was interesting. Something I guess I hadn't considered with enough weight is the amount of anxiety that can weigh on our learners from hearing the news. And that's something that we as a teaching community need to continue to address, that our students are absorbing more than we may anticipate. And I love this idea of talking about the solutions and how they play a role in being a part of that solution. So that was a new thought for me.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a really vital thought, because I think if you feel like things are out of your control and things you can't engage in, the anxiety and just the grief that will pile up becomes insurmountable for many people. So there is like a growing social emotional learning dimension of climate change education, just in response in that way. Well, so you're both kind of lifting up some very particular design commitments here. So that first one, Audrey, you were just talking about that students' climate anxiety and despair can be mitigated by learning about collective and individual solutions. And the recommendation that we settled on in the brief is to spend 3/4 of instruction on exploring solutions, which is almost the exact opposite, or even worse, in terms of what happens in science classrooms typically. So, and then the second design commitment is that in instructional efforts, focus on how the non-dominant communities have developed solutions and built resilience in the face of climate change impacts, historically and in ongoing ways. So like there's a lot of great examples of communities, who are impacted deeply, like doing amazing work to kind of respond and to get out in front of future effects and that kind of thing. So lifting up those more asset-based endeavors is a productive, important thing to do. So I'm gonna sink into a bit of just sharing of all sorts of different kinds of resources. So we looked at a version of a practice brief that we just read together and made sense of. And then I'll talk about each of the other 6 things that are on this list. I'm not gonna enumerate them now because I'm going to open up each one a bit and just like show you what those pieces look like. And so why don't we just keep sinking in, and feel free to unmute and just pop in whenever something comes up for you that you want to ask about or share into the space. So STEM teaching tools are these short 2-page briefs. And we've published 91 of them in that format. And we have other PD modules and different things that I talked about in the last hour. The ones that are specifically related to climate change education are listed here at the top, and I'll just like scan the different, so there's kind of these different topics. So why teach climate change? Like, why should I even stop and do that work of integrating it? pedagogy with a foundation on justice and ecological caring. Like, how do I kind of hold that stance? I think, Sonia, it sounds like in the monarch butterfly example, you're doing a version of that ecological caring move with the milkweed. Like, how do we actually be part of that flourishing ecosystem context? Another category around selecting justice-centered local anchor phenomena. So we talked a little bit about this last hour, but for environmental justice issues or topics, like how do we actually identify local spaces where that's unfolding and how groups are responding to kind of protect communities from legacy pollution or different topics. Focusing climate change learning on solutions, the thing we were just diving into. We have a couple of other resources in that category. And then the importance of building partnerships with scientists, families, and other community members who have relevant expertise on the topic. So a couple of these particular resources come from our really fabulous collaborators in the Learning in Places project. So if you haven't explored learninginplaces.org and you do outdoor ed related things in your science teaching, I really encourage you to go explore learninginplaces.org. They've been building resources and frameworks over the past 5 years that are just stunning and really powerful. So any other questions about STEM teaching tools? Otherwise, I'm going to just keep making our way through different resources. All right. I'll trust that you'll both pop in as needed. Okay, so this newer effort that I talked about, the Climate Teacher Ed Collaborative, so this is pre-service teacher ed, but the resources that we're building there are more broadly useful for professional learning in general, and so people are using them in different ways. We've just launched this network of 16 colleges and universities to do some shared work together, and a lot of new resources are in development. I guess I'll share a couple of them just verbally. One, there's an arts pedagogy group trying to think about how do you actually integrate arts pedagogy deeply with STEM education so that you can kind of open up kind of creative ways of understanding and reimagining the world through art practices. Another group is trying to give teachers kind of tactical support around how to open up climate justice work at different grade levels and different contexts. So how do you kind of think about the political dynamics or the possible things that might kick up if you're a 5th grade teacher and you're trying to like do a climate justice, anchor kind of phenomena move. And so they're trying to resource teachers to kind of have tools to think through those different choices. So those are 2 groups, and so stay tuned as we kind of share those out on the portal, but they're kind of in active development right now. One thing that we have been doing that have been quite popular and useful is 1-hour video webinars on different climate and environmental justice approaches. So we started these last February and they ran through September. And so you can kind of scan the topics there in the middle of each poster to get a little bit of a sense, but it really covered a broad variety of grade levels and contexts. So really kind of just encourage people to kind of jump off to the playlist. Those are all on YouTube on our UW channel, and so you can kind of get to the webinar recordings, and they're really powerful. We basically ask each group of presenters, how do you define climate justice in your work? What does it look like on the ground to do that work? And how do educators find their way into that work? So each session kind of has those 3 parts to it, and we're using them in teacher ed spaces, but they're really great just generally about kind of in professional learning spaces. As part of that same collaborative effort, we're building teacher ed lesson plans that are open ed resources. So we have 2 of them that are published thus far, and we have like 3 more about ready to get published. So I'm going to pop over and show you what one of them looks like. You can think of them as like lesson plans for teacher ed courses. It's kind of like if you were a teacher educator, like what's a lesson plan you might adapt. And so this one is around just defining environmental and climate justice. It uses the video that we watched together at the top to kind of get a definition going and to have people think through particular ideas. So you see the learning goals and assigned readings, a flow of activities to make sense of climate justice and to connect it to their own practice, so they can kind of start making those connections. And all of the embedded resources and everything that link off are things in our broader collection or are available online. So We have, we're working on building lesson plans to go with each of the webinars so that you kind of watch the video and then you have a lesson plan to go with it. Climb Time is our other network that I mentioned. So this is the group that's been running since 2018, and you have professional learning providers who've worked with 26,000 teachers over that timeline. Going online really expanded the reach of the program during shutdown. And so, you know, it certainly had that upside. You see some stills of the work off on the right. So you see in the bottom right, a group of teachers out in a part of Washington State where megafires are routinely happening now, and they're trying to, scientists are bringing them into understanding, you know, fuel load analyses within settings to understand potentials for fires. Right next to it, you see a group of educators who were brought into Muckleshoot Tribal Nation context to start to learn about how that particular community is mitigating and responding to climate, adapting for climate, and how Indigenous ways of knowing relates to those responses. And then at the top, you see another effort around teachers learning about regenerative agriculture that they can bring back to their classroom. Those are just 3 examples of probably about 50 amazing things that have happened. So the website for Climb Time has a lot more detail around that, and I'll drop the link to the success stories for Climb Time if that's of interest. One of the things that we've been doing within Climb Time is around using assessments to be part of a implementation approach. And so small groups came together to build 3-dimensional learning assessments that fit with the NGSS framework vision, but focused on climate phenomena specifically. And so they span across grade levels. And so I think I need to go here, and I need to go back one step. So this part of the website talks about kind of that assessment project, and then links off to all the assessments that span PK-12 actually. So there are some for at least, like, you know, a few for early child, you know, maybe not exactly preschool, but getting into the K2 space up through high school. And so we can kind of pop into one of these and just give you a sense of what it looks like. So you kind of have the assessment description and focus as it ties to the standards. You have a teacher guide that gives like the elaborated details of what the assessment is actually assessing in the performance of students. You have facilitation slides embedded that would help you run the assessment in the classroom. And then we have student task documents that, you know, where they express their understanding in response. The performance kind of pieces, you know, how to actually make sense of student responses, that's happening now in the network. And so those tools for kind of rubrics for understanding the range of student responses are still in development. But these assessment clusters are available and are just you know, ready for people to use across the various units that they teach. Climb Time more generally, so in the professional learning work, part of the state funding requires the creation of open education resources out of those efforts. And so the group has been publishing a range of the different things coming out of their space. And so you kind of have, I think it's 128 affiliated resources, I'm seeing it at the top, that span the different grade levels and the professional learning approaches. And so it really is like just another rich set of resources that people can be building from. So, you know, that's kind of our whole thing, is to like provide quality resources that people can adapt and make use of. So if that is of interest, there are curriculum units and professional learning resources in the OER Commons of Climb Time. All right, so sometimes early on when we were starting to build the practice briefs, people would say, yeah, but what does it really look like on the ground? Like, you know, it's kind of like, it sounds great, but what does it actually look like? So the webinar videos that kind of highlight practice is one strategy. The other strategy we've been using are these articles that describe practice. So I'll drop that in the chat, and I'll go pop to that tab as well. So we've, this isn't the easiest thing to navigate, but all the links are here. So we've been working with the National Science Teaching Association to build practitioner articles on different climate and environmental justice work. And so those are gathered here in this part of the learning portal. And so let's pop into this one. So Pranjali and Ray are describing their justice-centered elementary science storylining work. So you can kind of get a practitioner article describing and opening up how they engage in that work, and they link off to the units that are in that open resource collection I was just sharing, and talk about what they've learned about kind of running these units out in their networks with elementary educators. So it's a rich image of practice in that NSTA article kind of way. So moving right along, now we had a previous effort that was trying to come up with summaries of educational research for practitioners. So it's the Relating Research to Practice project. Within that particular effort, there were a subset of the overall collection that we were building that were focused on climate and environmental teaching. And so there's a subset of topics. So these are basically more in the research briefs for educators direction. And so if you go to the Relating Research to Practice website, you can kind of find, so I don't know, let's pop into place-based expertise. So then you get a more research brief like style description of what was the research about, how was it designed, what were the findings, important theoretical ideas, and then implications for practice. So it's less deep on what it looks like in the classroom, but it's more about the research foundations behind the work. So the thing I'll say about Relating Research to Practice is that it's kind of underused as a resource. There are, it's hard sometimes to get access to research articles out in the world because they're behind paywalls. And so part of our strategy is to come up with those 1 to 2 page summaries. And I think there's about 450 in the collection on different science and STEM topics. So you can kind of find things about climate, but there's research summaries on a range of different topics as well. So if that's of interest, that is waiting to be used as well. All right. I wonder, any questions before, I have a couple more things to share, but I worry that I've been talking a lot. Are we okay?
Could you tell me how to access the research briefs you were just talking about? Because that was of interest to me. I wasn't clear on how to access those.
Yeah, for sure. So in the notes part of each slide, I either embed the links directly in the slide like it's shown there, or I drop them into the notes field as well. And so those are all on rr2p.org, relatingresearchtopractice.org. And so that's the link I just dropped in chat, and it's the same one that's kind of embedded in the text. All right. Well, at a different level, we try to engage in public pedagogy in our graduate program as well. And so a colleague of mine, Nancy Price, and I 2 years ago taught a graduate seminar about climate and environmental justice in education. And that course in and of itself, we published online, so you can kind of get access to all of the readings and assignments and the products of the group. And we did a whole thing where we crowdsourced a bunch of resources. So there's a few hundred resources embedded throughout that class as well. The class is really highlighting kind of the ecological caring practices in relation to flourishing in the world, and it's really trying to think about multi-species flourishing. So, which is a very particular concept of like thinking beyond human thriving. So one of the problems in climate response is one where we don't worry about other living things on the planet, but we worry about ourselves. And so how do we do educational work to kind of disrupt that human exceptionalism focus? Like, we certainly want to take care of people, but we also have to worry about all the other living things. And I can say in the Pacific Northwest, in the summer of 2020, when we had a heat wave unfold and highest recorded temperature in Washington state of 117 that ever happened, which is crazy. We had 1 billion seashore animals die in those 4 days. And so at some level, like, there's just this issue, like, how do we think about large impacts on other living things? And so the class kind of opens up around that and centers in around, well, how do we care for a multi-species world in our context and beyond? So graduate seminar that kind of goes deep in those directions. All right. I have a couple of resources just to kind of engage with together, just kind of going back into the sinking into explore. So this particular STEM teaching tool was authored with a group, an interdisciplinary group that is trying to get climate conversations going around the world. So they're trying to resource people about how to just talk about climate, because like at some level is something that is a little bit fraught. It can be. And so people hold back from opening up these conversations. And the research brief is great, but I actually was hoping that people would stop and read their infographic resource and just reflect on how they might use it either with other educator friends or with your students even, to help them think about how to talk about climate. So I'm going to drop that link so you can get to the PDF directly and just stop and pause and let people read it for a minute and see if it helps you think about how to talk about climate differently. Structured in a very helpful do and don't kind of format. All right. I'm wondering if people have thoughts. Like, is this a useful resource? And like, what are your reactions? Like, what are you drawn to?
I was responding to the one with the hydrogen, where it talks about helping our kids to embrace the idea of embracing and responding to the difficult facts. Like right now, we're facing a very large water crisis here in Nevada. Like, that's a real thing.
Yeah.
And I could see a lot of what is mentioned on the don't side is really what is being focused on right now, of this doomism of we're running out of water and like we need to conserve water, and that's the only solution that they're presenting is just use less water. That's gonna be the whole thing.
Right.
Use less water, right? But instead, I love this whole idea you've been presenting this whole time of opening the conversation with truth, but focusing on that solution base and helping them embrace that they are part of that solution. And I think that is a really attractive thing to me that's mentioned on this beautiful one pager.
Love that. Yeah, the doomerism, discourse is really troubling. where you certainly want to put information on the table that's complicated, but you want it in a way that goes after root causes and that's actionable. And so we often try to have discussions about how to be responding at different timescales. Because it could be like there's something that we have to do this year differently because like particular things are happening. But like, how do we make changes to how water is available in that mega drought situation 10 years from now? So like, what are the bigger changes that we need to be making? And like, how do we have collective conversations that open up, you know, the possibility of bigger changes to happen in the future? And so I think it's really kind of, yeah, I really think that's a worked example. I grew up in Colorado and Denver, so I kind of certainly feel the drought condition dynamic, you know, with the Colorado River and everything. So it's worrisome, and it requires action on different scales. Sonia, I think you were going to say something too.
There you go. It kind of fell out of my head what I was going to say, but I just thought it was a good overall. I'm thinking of like teacher perspective.
Yeah.
On having the kids come up with solutions, but also having like, because especially primary, they don't have a lot in their schema about how to solve the problems.
Yeah.
So teachers having the resources of these are different solutions we could try. And because I'm just thinking like, you know, I'm the only teacher in this one. I'm kind of surprised, you know, but a lot of teachers I have on preschool teachers like STEM isn't for me, you know, and stuff like that. And they just, and special ed a lot of times. So how to get that inclusiveness on the teachers too. Yeah. I mean, I think this is really good to share with everybody. I have a couple of different things going on with thinking of the different ways to implement it, how we can implement it, and what do we implement based on grade level and need.
Yeah, so one of the things that's kind of coming to mind as you're talking is that within the Climb Time professional learning work, one of the early insights from the first year was the importance of getting hyper local about what's happening. So some of the lessons that were pulled together around that are things like chronic flooding of our playground or our park near our house. So it's kind of like bringing students into understanding very local effects that are being exacerbated by changes in climate, and then try to think about so what do we know about solutions? So the solutions are directly in response. And I do think as we kind of started to sink into that, there, at some point in elementary school, it becomes important to think about context other than your own. So in the upper grades, you have people connecting into civic education around what's happening in other parts of the world around climate change, and how do we, there become very natural bridges to social studies and other ways of bringing phenomena into focus and helping students see kind of some of the parallels and differences across those situations. So certainly, I guess what you're reminding me of, at this moment where ELA and math are getting so much of the elementary school oxygen, a topic like climate that is just inherently interdisciplinary opens up spaces to think about integrated approaches that maybe otherwise aren't things that they would necessarily find their way into if they came at it because science isn't necessarily their thing historically, but through the interdisciplinary lens, you might be able to bridge to some of the science in relation to kind of an ELA engagement or kind of a math engagement. So I appreciate that. All right, so there's one other resource I wanted to kind of share today, just because it was built in response to some of the complexities of what was happening out in Climb Time, which were just the politics of teaching climate. So in an increasingly politically polarized national landscape, this resource has been helpful just to help people navigate some of those dynamics that can come up. And I think there's a large number of educators who report just not even edging into the climate space because it might be political. And so you have a lot of kind of hesitation kind of behind taking up the topic, even though it's a vital thing for us. So why don't I dropped the link to STEM teaching tool number 78, and I just thought we'd stop and for a couple of minutes, take a look at it, and then we can kind of come back together and either, move on or make sense of it together, depending on the will of the group. Melanie, welcome. I'm going to drop the link to the slide deck for today so you can get to the original slide deck. Come back together in about 30 seconds. All right, were there things that jumped out at people that they thought might relate to something that they want to do or think about?
I just look at, you do get pushback on indoctrination.
Yeah.
If you've ever read The Children's Story by James Clavell, the one who wrote Shogun.
Okay.
It's a really quick read, and it's a kind of about how teachers, like it's just a book everyone should read, how teachers influence children and can get them to like change their mind. And it would be like an indoctrination. And I think sometimes you get that. I had a parent get really upset because we're wearing masks when we went back. And I said, you have to put your mask on, like right when we had reopened schools. And they were upset that I was making their child, but that was the agreed upon that we go to school, we wear a mask. And yeah, it was really bad. And I was indoctrinated. I'm like, no, we're all wearing masks, kind of thing. So I think this is it's a good thing to think about, and how I'm trying to remember what they had said exactly. Like, let me see.
Critical thinking as the response, right?
And that it's on, it's not only science-based information, but rely on social and cultural context to resolve issues.
Right.
Well.
Yeah, you're kind of reminding me, we did a study about a decade ago where it was in a pretty politically conservative part of the state, and students were coming in not having seen the evidence underneath the climate change claims, right? They thought, a lot of the students had just thought it was a political battle. Like, it's kind of a he said, she said kind of situation. And it like either does or doesn't exist, like, depending on your ideology or whatever. And so like, once the students started to understand that there's so much evidence that all triangulates in the same direction, and they kind of realized there's an evidence-based thing, and then this political thing is happening around it. got a number of students who kind of just were having really big epiphanies where in their everyday life, climate change was just like any political topic. And then they realized like, oh no, it's happening. We just don't know how to be bringing that back to our home life, family context to talk about it or whatever, because it's still so politically volatile. And so, yeah, it's just one tries to give some guidance around that. And I do think, I guess the last thing I'll lift up before we kind of go to close for today is just around this work that's described in the second bullet under recommended actions. And I'm realizing that we might have somebody who joined us that didn't have the link, which is just about like when somebody is denying climate change, it sometimes isn't even like the right thing to talk about climate change. Like sometimes you can just talk about some other thing that's changing in their world or in their community that is being impacted by climate change that they care about. And so there's a growing kind of science communications, knowledge base around how do you actually bring people into caring and responding without making it about a political ideology, debate. So that particular paragraph links off to a bunch of resources and frameworks for that kind of thinking. All right, well, I kind of want to be mindful of time. So just as we kind of go to wrap up, in the last session, we did a little bit of a deeper dive. It is Native American Heritage Month this month. We've been curating kind of a set of resources over the years that highlight Indigenous ways of knowing in relation to STEM education. So there's over 140 examples and lesson plans and videos and background resources in that Pinterest board. So if those might be of interest, I'll kind of point you there. Not surprisingly, a lot of the resources are directly about climate and environmental justice, which is our overall topic. And if you kind of want to think a little bit more concretely about kind of instructional practice as related to supporting Indigenous students navigating multiple ways of understanding the natural world, this particular STEM teaching tool, number 11, is a really great resource that my colleagues Marissa Spang and Dr. Megan Bang wrote a while ago, but it's like still a really great entry point into upholding Indigenous sovereignty and self-determination through science teaching. So I will stop here and just point you to a set of things where you can follow up with us afterwards. We are, all of our resources are on stemteachingtools.org. Some of our detailed examples that I shared around the climate professional learning work are on climetime.org. We are on Facebook within both of those projects, and we're on Twitter for as long as it's active. So you can kind of find us there, and we share lots of resources on Twitter. And so we're coming up with Plan B, but we don't quite have Plan B yet. So stay tuned to the website and sign up for our newsletter. That's probably our best way. So I'll stop sharing, and I'll certainly entertain any last questions, and otherwise